If you're going to silence me at my own son's wedding, I told myself, staring at the ballroom doors, then you'd better be ready for what happens when I stop playing nice. My name is Eleanor Whitman, I'm 67 years old. And I have learned that dignity isn't something you beg for. It's something you protect. That morning I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and pinned a small pearl brooch to my dress, the one my late husband once called my armor. Outside, the world looked like a postcard. Bright sky, clean spring air, and a venue so pretty it could have been lifted from a bridal magazine. The kind of place where you pay for the gleam of the chandeliers, and the promise that everything will be perfect. Ryan, my son, my only child, was getting married today. I had pictured this day for years, not as some fantasy, but as a quiet reward after a lifetime of packing lunches, paying bills, showing up and staying steady when life tried to knock us over. I brought a gift that wasn't flashy, just meaningful. An heirloom item wrapped in tissue paper and tucked into my purse like a secret. It was meant for the moment he and Madison would thank family. When a mother gets to stand, smile, and feel included. I should have known better. 48 hours earlier, I'd caught the first chill. Madison had sent out the final wedding schedule to keep everyone on the same page. And right there, in neat little bullet points, my name sat like an afterthought. No mention of a mother's toast, no line for recognition, nothing. I told myself it was a formatting mistake. Then I arrived at rehearsal dinner and watched her glide through the room, bright and polished, directing the evening like a producer. When she passed me, she smiled without warmth and said, "Oh, Eleanor, just follow the plan. Less stress for everyone. Less stress." As if my presence was a complication. By the wedding morning, I could feel the invisible line she'd drawn around me. When I walked into the venue, a coordinator greeted me politely and handed me a printed card. I looked down. Eleanor W. Not mother of the groom. Not Whitman. Just a letter like I was a coworker at a conference. I watched guests drift toward their tables, laughing, clinking glasses, snapping photos. The place smelled like roses and lemon, polish, and everything shimmered, until I found my seat. It wasn't near the front. It wasn't near Ryan. It was off to the side, closer to the service door than the head table, where plates would be carried in and out. I stood there holding the back of the chair, and for a moment I felt something older than sadness. I felt dismissed. My eyes scanned the room and landed on Ryan across the way, already in his suit, talking with Madison. He looked handsome, nervous, young in a way that made my heart ache. I lifted my hand slightly, hoping he'd notice me, hoping he'd come over and say, "Mom, you're right where you should be." But Madison leaned in and said something, and Ryan's gaze slipped past me like I wasn't even there. That was the moment the hook sank deep. Madison wasn't just organizing a wedding. She was rewriting the story of who mattered. And she was doing it right in front of me, under soft lighting and polite smiles, counting on my manners to keep me quiet. She was right about one thing. I would not cause a scene. But she was wrong about what quiet women can do. For the first 10 minutes, I did what women like me are trained to do. I smiled. I nodded. I folded my hands in my lap as if I belonged there. As if my chair near the service door was simply an unlucky detail and not a message. Around me, waitstaff moved with the quiet efficiency of people who had seen every kind of family drama dressed up in satin. They carried silver trays with glasses that caught the chandelier light, and they spoke in soft voices as though the room itself was sacred. It was almost impressive the way the venue could make anything feel elegant, even exclusion. I kept my posture straight and looked out toward the head table. Madison's place setting was perfect, centered like the sun. Ryan's was beside hers, angled toward her, as if the whole day had been arranged to face her direction. I noticed small choices I would have missed if my heart were not suddenly so alert. The family photographs displayed near the entrance featured Madison's relatives in bright frames, smiling in matching outfits, while the one photo of Ryan and me was smaller and tucked lower, half hidden behind a vase. The printed program listed a special thank you to the Clark family, and then a line that said, "And friends." Friends. I read it twice as if the letters might change. I did not want to believe that my son had agreed to this. I wanted to think Madison was simply careless, caught up in the performance of being the bride. But the truth was sitting right there in ink and cardstock, the kind of truth you cannot argue with because it never raises its voice. A coordinator approached my table with a polite smile that did not reach her eyes and asked if I needed anything. I almost laughed. What I needed was for my name to be said out loud like it mattered. Instead, I asked for water because dignity sometimes looks like making ordinary requests. When she returned, I caught sight of Madison watching from across the room. She was not staring openly. She was doing that thing certain people do, the quick glance followed by a satisfied look away, as if checking a box. I could feel it in my bones. She wanted me small today. She wanted me quiet. She wanted me grateful for whatever scraps of inclusion she allowed. I turned my gaze to Ryan again and waited for a moment when he would break away. When he finally did, my chest loosened. He started walking in my direction, and for a second I saw my little boy in him, the one who used to run into the kitchen after school, asking what was for dinner and telling me every detail of his day. Then Madison called his name. Not loudly, just firmly like a leash made of silk. Ryan stopped mid-step. He turned back to her immediately. He did not even glance at me to apologize. I felt something hard settle inside me. People talk about heartbreak like it is dramatic, like it is crying in a bathroom. Sometimes heartbreak is simply being skipped over in a room full of witnesses. The ceremony was scheduled to begin soon, and the air filled with that excited buzz that makes strangers feel like a community. Chairs were aligned in neat rows. Flowers framed the aisle. Music tested softly through the speakers. I stood when everyone stood, and I sat when everyone sat, and I told myself that I could get through this with my head high. But then I saw the reserved signs on the front row. Clark family. Clark family. Clark family. And on the other side, near the aisle but not quite the front, one small sign that read, Groom's side. No family name. No honor. Just a direction. As I lowered myself into my seat, I realized Madison had not only arranged the room, she had arranged the story. And in her story I was meant to be background noise. The ceremony itself was beautiful in the way a postcard is beautiful, all light and symmetry and carefully chosen angles. The music drifted through the air, soft strings that made people sit straighter and smile like they were part of something important. Madison walked down the aisle as if she had practiced every step in front of a mirror. Chin lifted, bouquet held just so, the picture of confidence. Guests leaned in with their phones, and I watched the screens glow like tiny stages. Ryan stood at the front in his suit, hands clasped, eyes shining, and for a moment I felt that old pride rise up in me despite everything. I had raised a good man. I had. And yet, when his eyes flicked across the crowd, they did not land on me. They landed where Madison wanted them to land. When the officiant began speaking about love and family and honoring the people who brought you here, I felt a strange numbness. The words sounded nice, but they floated above the room like decorations. I looked down at my hands, at my wedding band that I still wore out of habit, and at the pearl brooch pinned near my collarbone, and I wondered how many times I had told myself that patience was the same thing as respect. When the vows were done, applause filled the room, and everyone stood again, smiling wide, hugging, wiping happy tears. I stood too because I did not want anyone to see the tightness in my throat. As people filed toward the cocktail hour, I moved with the current, keeping my pace steady, my face calm. There is a kind of composure that takes effort, like holding a heavy tray level when the floor tilts. I found myself near the photo area where a photographer was lining up family groups. Madison's mother and father stepped forward immediately, their siblings and cousins gathering around them like magnets. The photographer called out, cheerful and loud, "Bride's family, then groom's family, then everyone together." I waited for someone to wave me in. I waited for Ryan to reach for my arm. Madison glanced over and smiled again, that same smooth smile, and said, "Oh, Eleanor, you can just hang back for a minute. We have a tight schedule." Tight schedule. Like I was an extra coat that did not fit in the closet. I looked at Ryan, expecting him to correct her, to say, "No, my mother is coming now." He hesitated, eyes darting between us, and then he said quietly, "Mom, we will get you in later." "Okay." He said it the way you speak to someone you do not want to upset, not the way you speak to someone you respect. The photographer started snapping pictures without me, and I felt the humiliation bloom under my skin, hot and silent. Guests nearby pretended not to notice, which somehow made it worse. I took a small step back, giving them room because I was not going to beg for space in a photograph. I walked to the edge of the cocktail area and picked up a sparkling water from a tray, holding it like a prop. The ice clinked softly and I focused on that sound because it was easier than focusing on the faces. That was when I noticed the wedding planner, a woman named Tessa, moving briskly with a clipboard, checking her watch, scanning the room for problems. Our eyes met for half a second, and something in her expression shifted. Not pity, not judgment, but recognition, like she understood exactly what was happening. She started toward me, then stopped when Madison called her name sharply. Madison leaned close to Tessa and spoke fast, smiling the whole time. Tessa nodded, but her shoulders tightened. I watched that exchange, and the numbness inside me turned into clarity. Madison was not improvising. This was choreography. And if this was choreography, then someone had written the cues, signed the contracts, and approved the plan. My manners had kept me quiet, but my name was on more than just a seating card. During cocktail hour, the room filled with the easy laughter of people who believed they were watching a love story. Glasses chimed. A jazz trio played near the corner, smooth enough to make even awkward conversations sound charming. I stood near a tall table, fingers lightly resting on my cup, and I watched Madison drift from group to group like she owned the air. Every time she passed, she left little trails of attention behind her. The kind that comes from being young and polished and certain that everyone should orbit you. I told myself to stay calm because calm is power, and I had not come this far in life to unravel in public. Still, I could not ignore the pattern anymore. It was not one mistake. It was a sequence. The seating. The program. The photos. The way Ryan turned back to her when she called. Madison was not simply excluding me. She was teaching the room how to treat me. And the room was learning quickly. A distant cousin of hers, a woman with a bright smile and sharp eyes, approached my table and said, "You must be so happy for them." Her tone was sweet, but her gaze scanned me like she was checking for signs of trouble. I smiled back and said, "I am happy for my son." I made sure to emphasize my son, because I refused to let the day erase that connection. The woman nodded, then leaned in slightly and added, "It is just so wonderful that Madison's parents made everything possible." Made everything possible. The words landed like a small slap dressed as conversation. I kept my smile steady and said, "A wedding takes many hands." Then she excused herself, and I watched her return to Madison's circle, whispering something with a small laugh. That was when I noticed Ryan across the room again, holding a drink he barely touched, his shoulders tense. He looked like a man trying to keep everyone pleased. Madison walked up to him and adjusted his boutonniere, a gesture that looked affectionate from a distance. Up close I could see it for what it was, a correction. A reminder. She spoke to him with her face turned slightly away, so the room only saw her smile. He nodded, eyes down, as if receiving instructions. I felt that same hot humiliation rise again, but I pressed it down. I did not need to win a shouting match. I needed to understand what Madison thought she could control. That was when Tessa, the planner, finally approached me. She came with a practiced, professional expression, but her eyes were careful. "Mrs. Whitman," she said quietly, "I just wanted to check in and make sure you are comfortable." The word comfortable sounded almost apologetic. I looked at her clipboard, at the neat tabs and highlighted lines, and I realized that somewhere on those pages were decisions that had been made about me. I said softly, "Tessa, I have a question. Who approved the final schedule?" She hesitated for half a breath, then answered, "The bride and groom signed off on everything." Signed off. I nodded slowly as if that was all I needed to know. Then I asked, "And the payments, the authorizations, the deposits? Those are tied to whose name?" Her eyes flicked down again, then back up. She lowered her voice. "They are tied to the card on file." I held her gaze and said, "Which is mine?" Tessa did not confirm it out loud, but her silence did the job. The music continued. People laughed. No one around us understood what had just shifted. I felt the weight of my phone in my purse like a key. I did not want to use it. I wanted my son to choose me without being forced. But Madison had made her choice clear, and Ryan had followed it, whether out of fear or convenience. Tessa swallowed and said, "Is everything all right?" I smiled gently, the kind of smile that reassures people right before you change the entire plan. "Everything is very clear," I told her. And in that moment I knew exactly what I was going to do next, and I knew I was going to do it without raising my voice. After I spoke to Tessa, I did not rush. I did not storm off to the restroom to cry, and I did not march up to Madison to demand an explanation. I simply stood there for a moment longer, breathing in the scent of citrus and flowers, letting the noise of the room become distant, like the hum of an air conditioner you stop noticing until it clicks off. Calm was not something I was pretending anymore. Calm was what I had earned. I reached into my purse and wrapped my fingers around my phone, not as a weapon, but as a reminder that I still had choices. In my mind, I replayed the last 48 hours with a clarity that felt almost clinical. Madison sending that schedule with my name reduced to a line item. Madison arranging the photos without me, smiling as she did it. Madison calling Ryan back like he was a child who wandered too far. And Ryan, my Ryan, letting it happen because saying no would have required a backbone he had not yet grown. I told myself something that I had avoided for too long. Love does not excuse disrespect. Family does not get a free pass to erase you. I walked toward the hallway that led to the quieter side of the venue, where the restrooms and service offices were tucked away. The farther I got from the music, the more I could hear my own thoughts. My heels clicked softly against the polished floor, steady and unhurried. A staff member passed me with a tray of champagne flutes and nodded politely. I nodded back. No one suspected anything because I was not performing anger. I was simply moving. In the hallway, I paused near a framed painting and opened my phone, scrolling to my recent calls until I found the venue manager's number. I had it because months ago, when I offered to help cover costs, I had insisted on speaking to the manager directly. I had not done it to control the wedding. I had done it because I had been widowed long enough to know that good intentions can turn into confusion if everything is left to someone else. Back then, I had told myself it was practical. Now I understood it was protection. My thumb hovered for a second before I pressed call. While the line rang, I thought about the word authorization the way Tessa had said it. Authorization was not just money. It was permission. And I had given permission under one condition I never wrote on paper but had always lived by. You do not humiliate me in public and expect me to fund the applause. The call connected and a calm male voice answered. This is Mark. I lowered my voice to match his, polite and composed. Mark, this is Eleanor Whitman. We spoke during the planning process. There was a brief pause, then recognition. Yes, Mrs. Whitman. How can I help you? My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. I looked down the hallway toward the distant glow of the ballroom, where laughter rolled out like waves, and I said, I need you to pause all services scheduled to begin at the reception start time, effective immediately. Another pause, longer this time. Mrs. Whitman, he said carefully, is there a problem? I kept my tone gentle. There is a boundary, I corrected. And it has been crossed. I could almost hear him shifting into professional mode, the part of his brain that weighed contracts and policies. We would need confirmation from the authorized account holder, he began, and I said, that is me. You can check the card on file and the signature. Silence. Then softly, yes, ma'am. My stomach tightened, not with fear but with finality. Mark asked, do you want everything stopped or certain items? I watched my reflection in the glass of the framed painting, an older woman with steady eyes and a pearl brooch like a promise, and I said, stop what I am responsible for. Anything that depends on my authorization. Mark exhaled quietly. Understood. When I ended the call, I did not feel triumphant. I felt clean, like I had finally set something heavy down. I slipped my phone back into my purse, straightened my shoulders, and turned toward the ballroom, ready to walk back into the light as if nothing had happened, because the most powerful moves are the ones you do not announce. When I stepped back into the ballroom, the lighting seemed brighter, almost too flattering, like a spotlight that pretends it is just ambience. The jazz trio had finished their set, and the room was in that in-between moment where people drift and chatter, and assume the next part of the evening will simply arrive on schedule. I walked slowly, not because I was unsure, but because I refused to look like I was escaping. A woman at the bar complimented my dress, and I thanked her. Two men near the appetizer station laughed about traffic and sports. Someone's aunt showed off a photo of the ceremony on her phone. The world kept spinning, unaware that a line had been drawn. Madison appeared near the center of the room, surrounded by her friends, her smile sharp and shining like glass. She was saying something animated, and the group responded with sympathetic gasps and laughter at the right times. as if she was already the star of a story where she could do no wrong. Ryan was nearby, nodding politely, his eyes scanning the room in quick, restless sweeps. The reception was supposed to begin in less than 15 minutes. I knew that because I had seen the schedule, the one that treated me like an afterthought, and because Tessa had checked her watch every few minutes like time itself belonged to Madison. I took a seat at my table again, the one close enough to hear the kitchen door swing, and I folded my napkin on my lap. My hands were still steady, my face still calm. I watched Tessa reappear with her clipboard, her pace faster now. She whispered to a server, then to a bartender, then leaned toward the band leader. From where I sat, it looked like regular coordination, the kind that happens at every event. But then the band leader's expression changed. He looked past her toward the stage area, then down at his sheet music, then back at her, confused. He said something I could not hear, and Tessa nodded tightly. A minute later, the sound system played a short test note, then fell silent. Another minute passed. The lights over the dance floor dimmed slightly, then returned to full brightness, like a brief hiccup. People glanced up, mildly curious, then went back to their conversations. Madison did not notice at first. She was busy posing for photos near the floral arch, turning her head to find her best angle, laughing with her friends. It was not until a server approached her with a cautious look that she paused. The server spoke softly, and Madison's smile froze. She looked around quickly, her eyes narrowing the way they do when something refuses to obey. She snapped her fingers once toward Tessa. Tessa hurried over, leaning in. Madison's mouth moved fast, her tone clearly irritated even from a distance, the kind of irritation that says, "Fix this now because I do not tolerate inconvenience." Tessa listened, then replied with a tight, careful expression. Madison's eyes widened, then flicked across the room. For the first time all day, her gaze landed directly on me, not sliding past, not dismissing. She stared as if she had finally noticed the person she had been trying to erase. I held her gaze without blinking. I did not smirk. I did not lift my chin in triumph. I simply looked back with the calm of someone who has already made peace with her decision. Ryan noticed the shift in Madison's posture and followed her line of sight. His eyes found mine, and something in his face tightened, confusion mixed with a sudden fear, like he was finally sensing consequences. He started walking toward me, then stopped when Madison grabbed his wrist lightly, not a dramatic grip, just enough to redirect him. She leaned close to his ear, speaking urgently, and Ryan's shoulders sagged as if he was being told what to think. Around them, guests began to murmur. People checked their watches. A few chairs scraped as relatives stood, trying to see what was happening. The room had not erupted, but the polish was cracking, and in the quiet between songs and announcements, you could feel the question spreading. Why was nothing starting? That question was my answer to every little insult from earlier. I sat perfectly still, napkin smooth on my lap, and I waited for Madison to do what she always did when she could not control the room. Look for someone to blame. Madison moved like the room belonged to her, cutting through clusters of guests with a smile that was starting to slip at the edges. She reached my table in a straight line, her heels clicking faster than mine ever would, and she stopped just far enough away to keep the scene looking polite. Up close, I could see the tension under her makeup, the tightness around her eyes, the way she inhaled as if she expected the air to obey her too. "Eleanor," she said, low and sharp, still smiling for anyone watching. "What is going on?" I looked up at her slowly, as though I had all the time in the world. "I am not sure," I said. "I thought the schedule was very tight." Her smile twitched. "This is not funny," she whispered. "People are waiting. The band is waiting. The staff is waiting." I let my gaze drift past her to the room, to the guests checking their phones and glancing toward the stage, to Ryan standing a few steps behind her with his hands half raised like he wanted to calm everyone and did not know how. Then I looked back at Madison. "Yes," I said softly. "They are waiting." Madison's voice dropped even lower. "Did you do something?" The way she said it made it sound like a crime to have any influence at all. I did not answer right away. I reached for my water and took a small sip, letting the ice settle, letting silence do what it does best. Madison's eyes flicked to my purse, then back to my face. Her expression shifted from irritation to suspicion, and then to something closer to panic. That was the moment she stopped seeing me as a background character. That was the moment she realized I had a pen in a world of ink. "Eleanor," she said, voice still controlled but strained, "today is about Ryan and me. You cannot make it about you." The audacity of that line landed so cleanly that I almost admired it. She had been making the day about herself since the first email, but she was accusing me of selfishness for refusing to be erased. I kept my tone even. "Today is about Ryan," I said. "That is why I am here. That is why I behaved with grace when my name was reduced to an initial. That is why I stood quietly when I was kept out of the photos. That is why I sat where you placed me like an inconvenience." Madison's smile cracked for a second, just a hairline fracture, and she glanced around quickly to see who might be listening. 2 guests at the next table had gone quiet. A bartender paused mid-wipe. Madison leaned closer, her perfume strong and sweet, and hissed, "You are embarrassing me." I met her eyes and spoke softly enough that only she could hear. "You embarrassed me first," I said. "You did it on purpose. And you did it because you thought I would swallow it." Madison straightened as if I had slapped her, though I had not raised my voice. Her cheeks flushed. "Ryan," she snapped, turning to him with a desperate kind of control. "Tell her to stop. Tell her to fix this." Ryan stepped forward and for the first time all day he looked directly at me, really looked, not past me. His face was pale under the warm lights. "Mom," he said, and his voice was too careful, "the way you speak when you are afraid the wrong word will set something off. What is happening?" I watched him, my son, the boy I used to measure on the kitchen wall with pencil marks, now a grown man in a suit, standing between the woman he chose and the woman who raised him. I could have begged him then. I could have cried and pleaded for recognition, for respect, for a simple, "I am sorry." But I had learned something important about people who let others silence you. They often do not hear you until the room goes quiet. So I asked him one question, calm and clear. "Ryan," I said, "did you sign off on a schedule that removed me from your day?" His eyes darted to Madison. That tiny movement told me everything before he even opened his mouth. Ryan stared at me for a beat too long, like a man caught between 2 scripts and suddenly unable to remember his lines. Madison's hand was still on his wrist, light but possessive, her smile now a tight mask that could not hide the tremor underneath. The room around us had grown quieter in a natural way, the way people quiet down when they sense something important is about to happen, even if they do not know what it is. A few heads turned. A few conversations stalled mid-sentence. You could hear the clink of a spoon against a glass somewhere near the bar, and then even that stopped. Ryan swallowed. "Mom," he said again, and this time his voice cracked slightly. "I did not think it would be a big deal. Madison said it would keep things simple." Keep things simple. The words hit me harder than any insult Madison could have delivered, because they proved he had seen me being minimized and had decided it was easier to let it happen. Madison lifted her chin, seizing the opening like a person who cannot stand a silence that she does not control. "It is our wedding," she said, loud enough for nearby tables to hear, still with that practiced brightness. "We are not obligated to give anyone a microphone." Nearby, someone let out a small, uncomfortable laugh, the kind people make when they want tension to disappear. I kept my gaze on Ryan. "I did not ask for a microphone," I said. "I asked not to be erased." Madison's eyes flashed, and she leaned in toward me, her voice syrupy and sharp at the same time. "You always make things dramatic," she said, and then with a sweetness that made my skin go cold, she added, "You should sit down and enjoy the party like everyone else. Sit down. Enjoy. Like everyone else." It was the same command in prettier wrapping. Ryan's shoulders sagged, and he opened his mouth as if to smooth it over, as if to request that I shrink for the sake of peace. I watched him, waiting for him to choose a side with his own words, not Madison's. Instead, he glanced around at the guests, the planner, the staff, and I could see his fear. Fear of embarrassment, fear of conflict, fear of Madison's reaction. Not fear of losing his mother's trust. That told me everything I needed to know about the order of priorities in his new life. Tessa appeared a few feet away, her clipboard held tight to her chest like a shield, her eyes flicking between us and the stage. The band members sat with instruments resting on their knees, looking uncertain. A server approached another table with appetizers, then hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue serving a meal that might never begin. The whole room was waiting for someone to take control. Madison tried. She turned toward Tessa and snapped, "Fix it. Now." Tessa's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked at me instead, and in her eyes was a question she could not ask aloud in front of guests. Madison followed that look and then turned back to me, her composure finally slipping. "What did you do?" she demanded, and the edge in her voice cut through the polite air like a rip in fabric. People definitely heard that. A few faces went stiff. A few relatives leaned in. Madison's parents across the room stood straighter, their smiles fading as they assessed the situation. I rose from my chair slowly, not to intimidate anyone, but because I was done being spoken to from above. I stood at my full height, shoulders back, and I spoke with the kind of calm that makes people listen. "I did not do anything to you," I said. "I did something for myself." Madison's laugh came out brittle. "For yourself," she repeated, as if that was proof I was selfish. I nodded once. "Yes," I said, "because you made it clear today that respect was optional. And I do not fund optional respect." Ryan's eyes widened, and the color drained from his face's understanding finally arrived. "Mom," he whispered, "did you cancel?" I did not let him finish the sentence because I refused to turn my boundary into a spectacle. Instead, I looked him in the eye and said, "I stopped what I authorized." The words were simple. The effect was immediate. Madison's mouth opened, then closed, and for the first time all day, she looked genuinely frightened, not of me, but of the fact that her control had limits. For a moment no one moved. It was as if the entire ballroom had inhaled and forgotten how to exhale. Madison's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape route that did not exist. Because there is no graceful way to recover when your authority slips in public. Ryan stood frozen, his lips parted, the word he had started to say trapped behind his teeth. Tessa clutched her clipboard tighter, like it might keep the room from tilting. Then Mark, the venue manager, appeared near the edge of the floor with a small headset, and the kind of calm expression people wear when they have handled emergencies before. He spoke quietly to Tessa, and Tessa nodded with a tight face that said she could not argue. A server approached the head table and began removing place cards with careful hands, not dramatic, just methodical, as if following a new set of instructions. The band leader set his instrument down and leaned back in his chair, waiting. There was no music to cover the silence anymore. Madison's mother started toward us, her heels clicking, her face flushed with embarrassment. "What is happening?" she demanded, loud enough for people at the nearest tables to hear. Madison turned to her parents with a bright, desperate smile that looked like it might shatter. "It is just a misunderstanding," she said. "Everything is fine." But her voice did not sound fine. Her voice sounded like someone trying to hold a door shut with one hand while the wind keeps pushing. Ryan finally found his voice. "Mom," he said, and it was not careful anymore, it was raw. "Why did you do this today?" I looked at him and felt the ache in my chest soften into something steadier, something like resolve. "I did not choose today," I said. "Today chose me when I was treated like I did not matter." Madison scoffed, trying to regain control, trying to turn the room against me. "You are being dramatic," she said, and her laugh sounded thin. "It was just a toast. Just pictures. Just a seat. Just—" that word again, the favorite word of people who minimize harm. I let it hang in the air for a beat. Then I spoke calmly, clearly, so no one could twist it. "It was not just anything," I said. "It was a pattern. And patterns become a life. If I accept being erased at a wedding, I will be erased at every holiday, every birthday, every family table. I am not starting that story." Ryan's eyes glistened and I saw something shift behind them, something adult waking up. He looked at Madison, then at the room, then back at me. "Mom," he said quietly, "I did not realize. I thought keeping the peace was the right thing." I nodded once. "Keeping the peace is not the same as keeping your integrity," I said. Madison's face hardened. "So you are punishing us," she snapped. "You are ruining our day." I kept my voice gentle, not for her but for myself. "I am not punishing anyone," I said. "I am choosing not to participate in my own humiliation." Then I reached into my purse and pulled out the small wrapped heirloom I had carried all day. the gift I had hoped to place in Ryan's hands with pride. I held it out to him, not like a bribe, not like a bargaining chip, but like a memory. This was meant to be for your marriage, I said. A reminder of where you came from. I can still give it to you one day, when respect is part of your home. Ryan stared at it, then at me, and his throat worked as if he was swallowing years of avoidance. He took a step forward and Madison tightened beside him, ready to pull him back. But he did not move toward her. He moved toward me. He did not grab the gift. He reached for my hand. His fingers wrapped around mine, warm and trembling. And in that touch I felt the boy I raised and the man he could become. I am sorry, he said, loud enough that Madison could not pretend she did not hear. The room stayed quiet, but the quiet changed. It was no longer a hush of gossip. It was a hush of recognition. Madison's smile collapsed completely, and she looked around, realizing the audience was not on her side. I released Ryan's hand gently and picked up my purse. I did not glare at Madison. I did not insult her. I only said one last sentence, steady as a promise. You do not silence the woman who built your life, I said, looking at Ryan as much as I looked at her. Then I walked toward the exit at the same unhurried pace I had used all day. Behind me I heard Ryan call my name, and this time it did not sound like a warning. It sounded like a choice.